My peaceful creek became a battleground when the HOA declared it a danger to children and forced me to drain it. But they never expected what would happen when that water found a new path. What would you do if the same people who destroyed your sanctuary suddenly found their own homes sinking into a swamp of their own making? Water splashed against my boots as I walked along my creek bed, listening to the gentle babbling that had soothed me for the past 11 years. Birds chirped overhead while dragonflies skimmed across the surface. This little stream running through my backyard was my favorite thing about my home in Riverstone Heights. After long days fixing other people's plumbing problems, I'd sit by this creek and feel my stress wash away. Mr. Jackson. Hey, Mr. Jackson. I turned to see Timmy and Sarah Thompson waving from the edge of my property. These neighbor kids often came by to catch frogs or watch minnows dart between the rocks. Can we look for tadpoles today? Timmy called out. Sure thing, I replied, smiling at their excitement. Just remember to put them back when you're done. I watched them carefully step from stone to stone, their parents comfortable letting them explore under my supervision. My creek wasn't deep, barely reaching my ankles at its fullest, but it was alive with tiny creatures that fascinated the neighborhood children. Little did I know this peaceful scene would soon become a war zone. The first hint of trouble came in the mail a week later. A thick envelope with Maple Valley Homeowners Association, printed in fancy gold letters on the corner. Strange, since our area had never had an HOA before. Inside was a welcome letter explaining that our previously unregulated neighborhood had been incorporated into the existing Maple Valley HOA from the newer development next door. I frowned at the attached paperwork. Monthly dues, architectural review requirements, and pages of rules about everything from grass height to holiday decorations. At the bottom was a signature line with an ominous note. Failure to return signed agreement within 30 days constitutes acceptance of terms. I tossed it aside, planning to ignore it. That strategy lasted exactly 3 days, until Karen Westfield appeared at my door. Good afternoon, she said, her smile tight and practiced. I'm Karen Westfield, the Community Standards Director for Maple Valley HOA. I noticed you haven't returned your membership agreement. I'm not interested in joining, I said simply. Her smile didn't waver. I'm afraid it's not optional. Your property deed includes a provision allowing for HOA formation if 75% of area homeowners agree, and we've reached that threshold. That can't be right, I argued. I've owned this place for over a decade. The provision was always there, she said, handing me a highlighted copy of something that indeed appeared to be from my property documents. Previous owners never activated it. We're just helping bring consistency to the whole area. I reluctantly signed the papers, but my stomach nodded as I handed them over. Wonderful, Karen said, tucking them into her folder. Our first neighborhood meeting is Thursday night, and she peered over my shoulder toward my backyard. We'll need to discuss that unauthorized water feature. Water feature? It's a natural creek. It was here before my house was built. Natural or not, it poses safety concerns. The Thompson children could wander in and get hurt. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The Thompsons bring their kids here specifically to play in the creek. They love it. Well, Mr. Jackson, unattended water features are against HOA regulations. We'll address it at the meeting. Thursday evening found me sitting in a folding chair in the community center, surrounded by neighbors looking equally confused about this sudden HOA takeover. Karen stood at the front beside a man she introduced as Richard Westfield, HOA president and, not coincidentally, her husband. We're excited to welcome Riverstone Heights residents to the Maple Valley family, Richard announced. Your homes will benefit from our proven property value protection strategies. I glanced around. Some neighbors nodded appreciatively, while others looked as skeptical as I felt. The meeting dragged on with discussions about mailbox standardization and approved fence heights. Just when I thought they'd forgotten about my creek, Karen clicked to a new slide in her presentation, a photo of my backyard. Moving on to safety concerns, she said. This unauthorized water feature on Elm Street poses an immediate drowning risk to children. I stood up. That's my property, and that's a natural creek that's been there for decades. It's not a feature I installed. The bylaws clearly state all water features must be approved and properly fenced, Karen replied, not bothering to address my point. It's literally 4 inches deep, I countered. Mrs. Thompson raised her hand. My children play in that creek all the time. It's perfectly safe. Karen's eyes narrowed. And do you have liability insurance covering potential accidents on Mr. Jackson's property, Mrs. Thompson? The question silenced the room. The rules exist for everyone's protection, Richard added smoothly. We'll need that creek either properly fenced with a locking gate or filled in within 30 days. After the meeting, I approached the Westfields. A fence around a natural waterway makes no sense. Wildlife needs access. Wildlife is another issue entirely, Karen said. Raccoons, possums, they carry diseases. The creek attracts them to our neighborhood. Your neighborhood? I've lived here way longer than you have. Richard put his hand on my shoulder. Look, we're just following the bylaws everyone agreed to. We'll be sending an inspection team tomorrow. I'd suggest compliance. The fines can add up quickly. I shrugged off his hand and walked away, my mind racing. Something about this felt wrong beyond the obvious overreach. Back home, I pulled out my property survey and studied it carefully. The creek entered my property from the northeast corner, flowing from the direction of the newer development where, coincidentally, the Westfields had their massive house. I grabbed a flashlight and walked upstream, following the creek beyond my property line. In the growing darkness, I traced it through a wooded area between developments until I found myself at the edge of a small retention pond behind the newer homes. As my light swept across the water, something metallic reflected back. Wading carefully to the edge, I discovered a drainage pipe partially hidden by cattails, a pipe that fed directly into my creek. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos, then followed the pipe back toward the houses. It led straight to the newest section of the development, right where the Westfields and other HOA board members all lived. I was still putting the pieces together when the sound of an approaching golf cart made me duck behind a tree. Through the leaves, I watched Richard Westfield drive up to the pond's edge. He got out, looked around carefully, then dumped something from a container into the water. As he drove away, I crept forward and shined my light on the pond's surface. Dead fish floated belly up where he had poured whatever was in that container. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine Wong, my neighbor. Check your email. HOA just sent violation notice. $500 fine for unapproved water feature. Says drain creek in 30 days or $100 daily penalty. I stared at the message, then back at the poison pond. This wasn't about safety or rules. Something much bigger was happening, and my little creek had somehow become the center of it all. The inspection team arrived at 7:30 the next morning. Karen Westfield with 2 men I recognized from the meeting as fellow board members. I watched from my kitchen window as they marched across my lawn without waiting for permission. Good morning, I called out, stepping onto my porch. Can I help you? Official HOA inspection, Karen announced, barely glancing my way. She was already taking photos with her phone, pointing at my creek and murmuring to her companions. I followed them around my property, growing increasingly frustrated as they trampled my vegetable garden to get a better angle of the creek. That's my tomato plants you're standing on, I said. You'll need to move this garden anyway, Karen replied without looking up. Vegetable gardens must be in backyard areas not visible from the street. It is in my backyard. Visible from the side street, she countered, pointing toward the road that ran along the far edge of my property. Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the bylaws. For 45 minutes they photographed, measured, and made notes about my creek. Karen's face lit up each time she found something new to criticize. Excessive wildlife attraction, improper plant species, potential mosquito breeding ground. Those are native plants that naturally grow along waterways, I argued. And moving water doesn't breed mosquitoes. Standing water does. Karen smiled thinly. Are you an environmental scientist, Mr. Jackson? No. I'm a plumber who understands water systems. Well, I'm sure the board will take your expertise into consideration. After they left, I called the only lawyer I knew, Marta Rodriguez, who had helped with my mother's will last year. HOAs have considerable power, she explained after hearing my situation. Your agreement gives them authority to regulate aesthetic and safety issues. But it's a natural creek. It's been here longer than any of the houses. Doesn't matter in HOA law, she sighed. They can regulate anything visible on your property. You can fight it, but honestly, it could take years and thousands in legal fees. 3 days later, the certified letter arrived. $500 fine for an unapproved water feature, with orders to drain the creek within 30 days or face additional daily penalties of $100. That evening, Mrs. Thompson knocked on my door, her children hovering behind her. "We heard about the creek," she said apologetically. "The kids are heartbroken." Timmy looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Can't you save the frogs, Mr. Jackson?" "I'm trying, buddy." I promised, though I had no idea how. After they left, I spread out maps of the neighborhood on my kitchen table. Something still didn't add up about the Westfield's aggressive push to eliminate my creek. I found an old geological survey online and compared it with current property maps. The creek didn't start on my property. It originated from an underground spring near the highest point of the neighborhood, which was now covered by the newest section of homes, including the Westfield's giant house. The next day, I visited the county records office, hoping to find more information about the development's water management plan. As I was examining property documents, someone tapped my shoulder. "Fighting the creek battle?" asked Elaine Wong, my neighbor from 2 streets over. Her friendly face was a welcome sight. "How did you know?" "We've all been there," she said grimly. "They forced me to remove my koi pond last month. It had been there for 15 years. My grandmother cried for days. It reminded her of home." "I'm sorry," I said, suddenly realizing I wasn't the only victim of the HOA's overreach. Elaine glanced at the maps spread before me. "Finding anything interesting?" "Maybe. Did you know this whole area used to be wetland? The developer filled it in to build those new houses." Her eyebrows rose. "Including the Westfield's place? Especially their section. And get this, I think they're diverting groundwater through my creek. I found a drainage pipe leading from their retention pond." Elaine's expression hardened. "You should talk to Dr. Martinez at the community college. He fought the development 5 years ago, said it would cause drainage problems. Nobody listened." That afternoon, I found Dr. Martinez in his cramped office, surrounded by stacks of environmental impact reports. "Of course I remember that development," he said, pushing his glasses up. "Terrible plan. They built on a natural spring system without proper mitigation." He pulled out a topographical map. "See these blue lines? Underground water channels. They run right under those new houses. And drain into my creek," I added. He nodded. "Exactly. Your creek is an essential relief valve for groundwater pressure. If you close it off," he made an explosive gesture with his hands. "The water has to go somewhere," I murmured. "Physics always wins," Dr. Martinez agreed. "Water follows the path of least resistance." Armed with this knowledge, I attended the next HOA meeting. When it came time for resident comments, I approached the microphone. "I'd like to discuss the environmental impact of removing my creek," I began. "According to geological surveys, it's part of a critical watershed system that helps prevent flooding." Karen immediately cut me off. "The association has already consulted experts on this matter." "Which experts?" I challenged. "Because I've spoken with Dr. Martinez from the Environmental Science Department, and he says, 'We're not here to debate settled issues,'" Richard interrupted. "The violation stands." "Next speaker, please." As I returned to my seat, I noticed several neighbors giving me thoughtful looks. After the meeting, Mrs. Thompson and 3 other homeowners approached me in the parking lot. "We believe you," Mrs. Thompson said quietly. "Karen's been using safety concerns to control everyone. Last month, she made the Patels remove their decades-old oak tree because acorns are choking hazards. I'm fighting this," I told them, "but I need help." That night, as rain poured down, I sat in my car across from my property, watching the crew the HOA had hired. Under portable floodlights, men in yellow raincoats dug trenches and laid large pipes, diverting my creek underground. By morning, my beautiful creek bed lay empty and dry, nothing but exposed rocks and mud where water had flowed for centuries. I felt hollow inside as I walked the dead creek bed, picking up stranded minnows and relocating them to a bucket of water. The Thompsons' children helped silently, their faces solemn as they saved what creatures they could. "Where will the water go now?" Timmy asked. I looked toward the Westfields neighborhood on the hill. "That's what I'm wondering too." The answer came 3 days later, as the storm intensified. I was awakened at 2 a.m. by frantic pounding on my door. It was Elaine, soaking wet and wide-eyed. "You need to see this," she gasped. "Bring your camera." I followed her through the downpour to the newest section of the development. As we rounded the corner onto Maple Drive, I stopped in shock. Water bubbled up through storm drains, flooding the street ankle-deep. Several homeowners were outside with flashlights, desperately trying to direct water away from their foundations. And there, in the center of it all, stood the Westfields in matching monogrammed raincoats, Richard shouting at someone on his phone while Karen directed neighbors to place sandbags around their property, and only their property. "The sewers are backing up too," Elaine whispered. 3 houses already have basement flooding." I remembered Dr. Martinez's words, "Water follows the path of least resistance." With my creek gone, the groundwater had found a new route, right under the homes of those who had destroyed its natural path. From the shadow of a large oak tree, I took photos and videos, documenting everything. As dawn broke, I noticed something even more interesting. The ground around several foundations was visibly shifting, tiny rivulets forming between houses as the earth became saturated. The Westfields' grand house sat at the highest point, seemingly safe for now. But physics always wins, and water, like truth, has a way of rising to the surface. They had no idea what forces they'd unleashed, but they were about to find out. "You have 30 days to comply." The words from the HOA notice burned in my mind as I stood in the rain, watching my beloved creek. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the water that had been part of this land long before any houses existed. Couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started searching. What rights did I have? What exactly was this creek? My simple questions led me down a rabbit hole I never expected. By sunrise, my kitchen table was covered with printouts, watershed maps, property surveys, and county records. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but what I discovered sent a jolt of energy through me. This wasn't just any creek. It was part of the Riverstone Heights watershed system, a critical drainage point for the entire neighborhood. "Look at this," I said to my neighbor Sam when he stopped by with coffee. I pointed to the oldest map, dated 1962. "See how the water naturally flows? It comes from an underground spring up by the hilltop, where Karen and Richard built their homes." Sam adjusted his glasses. "Wait, so if they stop your creek, the water has to go somewhere," I finished. "It doesn't just disappear." I needed an expert opinion, so I called the local university. Dr. Martinez, an environmental science professor with gray-streaked hair and mud-caked boots, agreed to visit that afternoon. She walked the length of my property, testing soil samples and taking measurements. Rain dripped from her hat as she crouched beside the creek. "This is a textbook example of a natural drainage system," she explained, scooping up some water in a jar. "These tiny organisms are indicators of healthy water flow. Disrupting this could have serious repercussions for the surrounding area." She pointed toward the higher ground where the fancy houses sat. "Your neighborhood was built on what used to be wetlands. Developers installed drainage systems, but they rely on natural waterways like this creek to function properly." Armed with this knowledge, I requested to speak at the next HOA meeting. Karen's face twisted with annoyance when I approached the microphone. "I've consulted with environmental experts," I began, slides of watershed maps appearing behind me. "This creek isn't just pretty, it's functional. It prevents flooding by channeling water safely away from our homes." Karen cut me off mid-sentence. The association has already consulted qualified experts on this matter, she said, tapping her manicured nails on the table. I couldn't help myself. Which experts exactly? Because I've called every environmental consultant in the county, and none have been contacted by the HOA. Murmurs spread through the room. Richard Westfield cleared his throat loudly. That's confidential information. Next agenda item, please. Walking to my car afterward, I heard someone call my name. It was Margaret Jo, an older woman who lived near the community entrance. I worked for the county water department for 30 years before retiring, she whispered, glancing around nervously. What you said in there was right. They're making a terrible mistake. She pressed a weathered business card into my hand. Call my old colleague at the water department. Tell him Maggie sent you. 3 days later, I met Tom Richardson from the county water department for coffee. He brought historical flood maps that confirmed my suspicions. Your HOA president lives here? He asked, circling an area on the map. This whole section was classified as a seasonal wetland until 2015 when the zoning was mysteriously changed. How could that happen? Tom shrugged. Money talks, but changing paperwork doesn't change geology. Water follows gravity, not HOA bylaws. That evening, I received an email from the HOA. My deadline to remove the creek had been moved up. They were sending contractors tomorrow. I felt sick watching the workers arrive the next morning. Heavy machinery tore into my backyard as Karen stood by her SUV, arms crossed triumphantly. By sunset, my beautiful creek was gone, diverted into underground pipes. The exposed creek bed looked like an open wound across my property. That night, a massive storm hit our area. I sat on my back porch, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Around midnight, my phone lit up with notifications from the neighborhood chat group. Anyone else's basement flooding? Water coming through my walls on Maple Drive. Sewage backing up in downstairs bathroom. I pulled on my raincoat and boots, grabbed a flashlight, and ventured out into the storm. Water pooled in the streets, but something caught my attention. The flooding wasn't random. It was concentrated around certain homes, particularly those near Karen and Richard's properties. Following a hunch, I sloshed through ankle-deep water toward their street. What I saw made me gasp. Water bubbled up through their perfectly manicured lawns like natural springs. The ground around several foundations was visibly shifting, with muddy water seeping from beneath concrete. My phone rang. It was Elaine Wong. My basement is completely flooded, and I'm not the only one. I know, I said, watching as Richard frantically tried to divert water from his garage with a broom. I'm looking at it right now. What's causing this? She asked. I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread as I answered. The creek water had to go somewhere, Elaine. It followed the path of least resistance, right under the homes of those who destroyed its natural course. As lightning flashed overhead, I noticed something even more alarming. A hairline crack had appeared along the side of Karen's house, growing wider as water continued to push up from below. My creek hadn't disappeared. It had simply found a new path, one that would soon teach the HOA a lesson they'd never forget. But even I couldn't have predicted what would happen next. Sirens wailed through the neighborhood at dawn. Emergency vehicles lined Karen and Richard Street as crews pumped water from flooded basements. I stood among concerned neighbors, watching the chaos unfold. Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7. Richard shouted through a megaphone, his designer shoes squelching in the mud. His perfect lawn had transformed into a soggy mess overnight. News vans arrived by mid-morning. A reporter thrust a microphone in my face. Sir, you live downstream from the affected homes. Has your property experienced any flooding? Strangely, no, I replied truthfully. My property used to have a natural creek that helped control water flow, but the HOA forced me to remove it last week. The reporter's eyebrows shot up. The creek was removed right before this flooding occurred? Karen appeared seemingly from nowhere, inserting herself between us. The timing is purely coincidental. This is clearly a city infrastructure failure. She yanked the reporter away to show her the emergency pumps instead. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine. "Did you see what happened to the Thompsons' house? It's the worst on the block." I hadn't. Making my way to their property, I found Sarah Thompson sitting on her front steps, surrounded by soaked photo albums and family heirlooms. Her husband Dean carried waterlogged items to the curb. These were the people whose children Karen had used as an excuse to target my creek. "I'm so sorry," I said, genuinely meaning it. "They weren't my enemies." Sarah looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Our insurance agent just left. They won't cover anything because it's classified as surface water intrusion. The adjuster said something about us being in an unmapped flood zone." I helped them carry furniture to higher ground as she explained how water had bubbled up through their basement floor like a spring, ruining everything stored there, including her grandmother's handmade quilts and their children's baby memorabilia. The community center buzzed with angry voices that evening. Every seat was filled with people standing along the walls. Neighbors who had never spoken at meetings before were demanding answers. Karen rapped her gavel repeatedly, trying to maintain control. "This meeting will come to order. Our first agenda item is the unprecedented flooding event." Richard stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "The board has been in contact with city officials. This appears to be a city infrastructure failure. Rest assured, we are demanding immediate action." Several homeowners shouted questions simultaneously. Karen pointed to a man in the front row. "My basement has flooded 3 times this week. Who's paying for this damage?" he demanded. "Your homeowner's insurance," Karen began. "They denied my claim," someone else interrupted. "Said it's not covered because we're on what used to be wetlands." I raised my hand patiently until Karen reluctantly acknowledged me. "I've been researching our neighborhood's geological history," I said, connecting my laptop to the projector. "What we're experiencing isn't unprecedented at all." My presentation showed historical maps of the area dating back to 1962, before development began. Our entire neighborhood was built on natural wetlands. The developers installed drainage systems, including natural waterways like the creek on my property. I clicked to the next slide, a county survey map highlighting water flow patterns. When the HOA ordered me to remove my creek last week, they eliminated a critical drainage point. Karen's face flushed. "This is absurd. Are you suggesting we caused this disaster?" "I'm not suggesting anything," I replied evenly. "I'm stating hydrological facts. Water always follows the path of least resistance. In this case, right under the foundations of homes built on filled-in wetlands." Richard stormed to the front. "This sounds like a threat. Are you admitting responsibility for this damage?" "I didn't redirect the creek," I said, looking him directly in the eyes. "The HOA did, against my warnings and expert advice." The room erupted. Parents whose children had supposedly been at risk from my creek now faced thousands in water damage. Homeowners who had remained silent during previous HOA overreach were suddenly demanding answers. Margaret Joe, the retired water department employee, spoke up. "I've contacted my former colleagues at the county. They're sending engineers tomorrow to assess the situation." "The HOA has not authorized any county inspections," Karen protested. "They don't need HOA permission," Margaret replied calmly. "This is now classified as a potential public health emergency." The meeting dissolved into chaos. As I packed up my materials, Sarah Thompson approached me. "The water in our basement keeps coming back no matter how many times we pump it out," she whispered. "Our foundation is cracking. The HOA is telling us to handle it ourselves, but we can't afford these repairs." "How many other families are in the same situation?" I asked. "At least 12 on our street alone," she replied. "We need your help. You seem to understand what's happening better than anyone." I hesitated. Getting involved could make me a bigger target for Karen and Richard's wrath. "I'll help on one condition," I finally said. "When the time comes, we vote for new HOA leadership." Sarah nodded firmly. "Just tell us what to do." The county engineers arrived the next morning, taking soil samples and conducting ground surveys. I walked with them, pointing out where my creek had been and how water now pooled in unexpected places. This is exactly what we warned the developers about 15 years ago, the lead engineer muttered, shaking his head. You can't just fill in wetlands and expect water to cooperate. Their official report arrived 3 days later via certified mail to all homeowners. Its conclusion was damning. The recent flooding is directly attributable to the unauthorized modification of natural drainage systems, specifically the removal of the creek at 247 Meadowlark Lane. I barely slept that night, knowing the report named my address specifically. When morning came, I stepped outside to find all 4 of my car tires slashed. A note had been tucked under my windshield wiper, "Back off or else." Rather than intimidating me, the threat solidified my resolve. I photographed everything, called the police, and then reached out to the local newspaper. The reporter who had interviewed me earlier jumped at the follow-up story. HOA blamed for neighborhood flooding. Read the headline 2 days later. The article detailed how the HOA had ignored expert advice and forced the removal of a natural drainage feature, leading to property damage for multiple homeowners. My phone rang nonstop with calls from neighbors I'd never spoken to before. They shared stories of other HOA abuses, arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, personal vendettas. They made me remove my son's basketball hoop because it was 2 inches taller than regulation, one father told me. Meanwhile, Richard's boat has been parked in his driveway for months against the same rules. What had begun as a fight for my creek had evolved into something much larger. The HOA had awakened a sleeping giant, a community tired of petty tyranny. That evening, as I helped the Thompsons install water barriers around their foundation, I noticed Karen and Richard watching from their car across the street. When they saw me looking, they quickly drove away. The neighborhood group chat pinged with an urgent message from Elaine. Emergency meeting at my house tomorrow, 6 p.m. Do not discuss on this chat. Spread the word personally. I sensed a revolution brewing. The water that once flowed peacefully through my land was about to become a flood of change that even Karen and Richard couldn't control. Someone slashed my tires, I told Officer Jenkins as he took photos of my car, and left this note. I handed him the threatening paper in a plastic bag. Any idea who might have done this? He asked, not looking up. The HOA president and his wife aren't happy with me right now. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine. Emergency meeting at my house. Now. When I arrived, people were crammed into Elaine's living room. The air felt heavy with worry and anger. My kid's bedroom ceiling caved in last night, Sarah Thompson said, showing us pictures of soaked stuffed animals and ruined books. Her voice cracked. They're staying with my parents now. Michael Rodriguez stood up, his hands shaking. 3 feet of water in my basement. My daughter's quinceañera dress was in storage down there. It was my grandmother's from Mexico. Gone. My insurance is dropping me, added Taylor Williams, clutching a letter. They're calling our homes high-risk flood zones now. The room exploded with stories. Ruined family photos, mold growing in walls, cars stuck in mud. Karen keeps saying it's a city problem, Elaine said. But the city engineer told me privately it's because of the creek diversion. Cleared my throat. I found something. I spread the old property maps across Elaine's coffee table. These show the original water paths before development. Look familiar. Everyone leaned in. The flooding pattern matched exactly where water used to flow naturally. The HOA has broken at least 6 environmental regulations, I explained. I've been talking to a reporter from the Tribune who's interested in our story. We've tried playing nice, said Elaine. Where has that gotten us? I pointed to specific spots on the map. These 7 drainage points used to let water flow naturally. When they built over them, they installed drainage pipes that were never meant to handle this much water. What if we just fix them? Suggested Michael. A plan formed. We created a group chat called Weekend Gardening Club to avoid suspicion. Saturday morning, 20 of us gathered with shovels, pickaxes, and wheelbarrows, claiming to be working on the community garden plot. We split into teams. My group tackled the drainage point behind the community center. We dug through packed soil, revealing the original streambed. Look, Sarah called out, holding up a piece of plastic. They literally covered the natural drain with construction trash. We worked all day under the hot sun, sweat soaking our shirts. Old Mr. Jenkins brought us lemonade. Kids joined in, making a game of carrying small rocks. Around 4 o'clock, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the edge of the common area. Karen jumped out, her face twisted with rage. "This is vandalism. I'm calling the police." I walked over calmly, covered in mud but smiling. "Hello, Karen. We're just helping maintain proper drainage as per Section 12.3 of the HOA bylaws." I handed her a laminated copy. It clearly states homeowners may perform maintenance on drainage systems to preserve property values. "This isn't maintenance, it's destruction," she sputtered. By then, other neighbors had gathered. Even families who weren't directly affected came to watch. "Is it destruction to prevent our homes from flooding?" asked Taylor, stepping forward. "Or is it destruction to ignore the warnings of environmental experts and pipe away a natural creek?" Karen's husband Richard appeared, pulling her aside. I could see them arguing, Richard looking worried as he pointed at the growing crowd of neighbors. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered. The forecast called for heavy rain overnight. We worked faster, completing 3 critical drainage channels. "Do you think it will work?" Elaine asked as we put away our tools. Thunder rumbled in the distance as I looked at our handiwork. "There's only one way to find out." That night, rain pounded against my windows. I couldn't sleep, wondering if our work would help or make things worse. At dawn, I pulled on boots and a raincoat and walked through the neighborhood. Where before there had been street flooding, now the water flowed smoothly through our newly restored channels. I followed the main path all the way to its endpoint, the Westfield's backyard. There, where Karen had once hosted her prize-winning garden parties, stood a perfect, pristine pond, with water gently flowing through it exactly as the original wetland had been. And at the edge of this new pond, staring in disbelief at her reflection in the water, stood Karen. Cameras flashed as the local news crew filmed Karen's newly formed backyard pond. Homeowners claim HOA negligence led to neighborhood flooding. The reporter announced, microphone in hand. Behind her, neighbors pointed at water damage to their homes. Karen pushed through the crowd, her designer shoes sinking into mud. "Turn those cameras off. This is private property." "Actually," the reporter responded, "we're standing on the community easement, as noted in county records." She smiled. "Would you like to comment on reports that your HOA ignored environmental warnings before redirecting a natural waterway?" Richard appeared, pulling Karen back. "No comment. We'll be issuing a statement through our attorney." The story aired that evening. By morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from neighbors I'd never even spoken to before. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight," read the official email. "Attendance mandatory. Failure to attend will result in automatic approval of all measures." The community center parking lot overflowed. Inside, every seat was filled with homeowners clutching papers and wearing angry expressions. Richard and Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, their faces tight with stress. Richard banged his gavel 3 times. "This meeting will address the unauthorized landscape modifications that have damaged neighborhood aesthetics and property values." "That's not why we're here," called Michael Rodriguez from the back. He stood, holding up his phone. "I've been on with FEMA all day. They're considering classifying our flood damage as a disaster caused by man-made water diversion." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Furthermore," added Taylor Williams, "I've received word from my insurance company that they're considering a class action lawsuit against the HOA for knowingly creating hazardous conditions." Karen's face flushed red. "These accusations are baseless. We followed proper procedures." Elaine stood up next, holding a thick folder. "I have copies of the environmental impact study that was submitted before the creek diversion. It specifically warned of potential flooding if the natural watershed was disrupted." She began passing out pages. "And here are the emails showing the board received and ignored these warnings." Richard's gavel slammed down again. "Those documents weren't meant for public distribution. They weren't meant to be hidden either," I said, walking to the front of the room. Public records laws made them available to anyone who asked. I turned to face the crowd. I also have the original permits showing the Westfields' homes were built on protected wetland without proper authorization. The room erupted. Parents whose children had been traumatized by flooding, elderly residents whose irreplaceable belongings were ruined, families living in hotels while mold was removed from their homes, all shouting questions at once. Sarah Thompson pushed her way forward. My children can't sleep at night because they're afraid water will come through their ceiling again. Who's going to pay for their therapy? Richard tried to regain control, but his voice was drowned out. I noticed him exchange a worried glance with Karen. Finally, Taylor Williams stood on a chair and whistled loudly. The room quieted. We've prepared a petition, she announced, waving a stack of papers. It calls for immediate board elections and has been signed by over 3/4 of homeowners. According to HOA bylaws, that's enough to force a vote tonight. Karen grabbed the microphone. This is ridiculous. We've maintained property values and community standards. Without us, this neighborhood would fall apart. An elderly man I'd never seen speak at a meeting slowly rose. My wife and I have lived here for 30 years. We watched them fill in the wetland to build those fancy houses. Nature always wins in the end. You can't fight water. It goes where it wants. The vote wasn't even close. Elaine became president, with Michael and Taylor elected to the board. Their first official act was to approve a comprehensive water management plan that included restoring my creek. For months later, I sat by my flowing creek, watching tadpoles dart between rocks. The water caught sunlight, throwing sparkles against the banks where native plants had returned. Neighborhood kids had built a small bridge downstream, where they now watched for frogs under their parents' watchful eyes. The Westfields had sold their house at a loss and moved away. The new owners embraced the wetland restoration project, even adding bird feeders to attract more wildlife. It looks like it was always meant to be here, said Elaine, joining me beside the creek. Because it was. I nodded, dipping my fingers in the cool water. How's the class action lawsuit going? Settlement talks start next week. The HOA insurance is covering most damages. A blue heron landed gracefully at the water's edge, studying its reflection before stabbing at a small fish. You know, Elaine said quietly, Karen left something behind when she moved. What's that? A sign. It was in her garage. It said, Danger. Water hazard. Keep children away. Elaine smiled. I put it up by the community garden with a new sign underneath that says, Nature. Not a danger, but a teacher. I laughed, watching the water flow freely where it had always been meant to go. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or rules, but simply from letting nature take its course. What would our world look like if we stopped fighting against it and started working with it instead?